So we're here at the Othona community in West Dorset, just at the start of a retreat, a 3-day retreat, led by Claire Gilbert, who's with me here, and the title of the retreat is I, Julian. Where's the title come from, Claire?
The title comes from my latest book on Julian of Norwich.
So you're an author, you're a retreat leader, probably other things, and what's your day job?
I'm currently the founder director of Westminster Abbey Institute.
What does Westminster Abbey Institute do, please?
It works with the neighbours, Westminster Abbey's neighbours around Parliament Square, so politicians, civil servants, the judiciary and other public service organisations, to nurture and revitalise moral and spiritual values in public life and service. And we work with people of all faiths and no faith.
Great. So that's based at the Abbey.
Yes.
Super. Tell us a bit more about how I, Julian, came to be written, please.
Yes, of course. Well, I fell in love with Julian of Norwich, who was a 14th century woman mystic, English, during a very dry theology degree at Oxford University. And she was the bright star in that degree. And I sort of stayed in touch with her in the years that followed. And I ended up writing my doctoral thesis on her in relation to the ecological crisis. After I'd finished doing that, I was diagnosed with myeloma, which is a cancer of the blood. And she stopped being the subject of my academic study and became my spiritual companion and friend and guide through 2.5 years of really grueling cancer treatment. During that time, I asked a group of friends if I could write to them about what was happening to me. I said, this thing that you could do for me. You know how it is when you have a dear friend who's got ill and you really want to do something to help and you don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But this was something I said people could do for me. They could read what I wrote, and I didn't want to edit it or make it or sanitize it. I wanted to tell them what was going on. And bless them, they said yes. And so I wrote these letters to dear readers, as we call them, and there was lots of Julian incorporated into these letters because I was telling them not just about the treatment and the ghastliness of that, but also all the things that inspired me and kept me going and kept me positive, and she was most definitely at the top of the list of things which did that, along with horse riding and sea swimming and meditation and that sort of thing. And so she was this really important figure through this time. She taught me how to face pain. And as I came to the end of the treatment in July 2021, I can only really describe it like this. I heard a call to tell her story with the same deeply honest voice that I'd discovered in writing these letters to my friends during the treatment. And it was an audacious thought, because one of the things that you learn about Julian as you read her text is that she does not want to talk about herself. She says, it's not about me, it's about what I saw, and I want you to see what I saw. Don't look at me, I'm a wretch, she says, don't look at me. So to tell her story, when that was precisely what she didn't want, seemed pretty audacious. I didn't know if she'd let me, if I can put it that way. But also, there are lots of questions about who Julian of Norwich is. The manuscripts that we have are all later, much later than she lived. We know there was an anchoress called Julian in Norwich at the end of the 14th and beginning of the 15th century because of external evidence, legacies, and an account of a meeting with her by Marjorie Kemp. But the manuscripts, as I say, are much later. And the manuscripts don't mention Julian, and they don't mention Ankerhold. But they do say, I had these visions in May 1373. So the
Ankerhold is the little cell she lives in.
That's right, that's right. So she said she had these visions in May 1373, so the dates work. And the manuscripts are attributed to Julian of Norwich, but these are rubrics, they're added. So I had to but I made a virtue of that, if you like. So it was going to be historical fiction because I was going to weave a story out of the few facts that we had contested, but I wanted to tell a good story. And I also wanted to use my creative imagination and draw on my experience of my own suffering to tell the story, because there was something very deep and authentic about that for me. And I found the story came out, well, the first draft, really quite quickly. It poured out of me, and it was a bit like prayer. I'd wake up in the morning, dive deep to connect with Julian. I wouldn't call it channeling, but I was deeply connecting with her to tell this story. The experience was very well put by Jeremy Irons, who said when he read it, he thought he couldn't see, he could see how close I was to her. And he said it reminded him of when he acts, say he's given the part of King Lear, he would study the part and do the research, and then he'd settle that to one side in the performance and just embody the character. And he would not know where Jeremy Irons stopped and King Lear started. And I felt that I didn't know where Claire Gilbert stopped and Julian started. So the book is really personal, but it is her story. So that's how it came to be written.
And talking of personal books, I believe the letters you wrote when you were ill to your dear readers formed a previous book.
That's right. They weren't written to be published.
No.
They were deeply, deeply personal and honest.
Oh, they are.
but it just became clear after I guess it's about 6 months of writing that they would help others.
And that book is called
Miles to Go Before I Sleep.
Quote from a poem. Yes.
Yes.
So that was an earlier book, and then Julian has been published just this year.
That's right. Yes.
Great. Now, I think before we begin the retreat, for all the retreatants, you chose to read one particular passage from the book as a kind of way in.
Yes.
Why this particular passage, and tell us what we need to know as background.
I will. Yes, so I think this is a good passage to start a retreat with, because it's an invitation to enter Julian's cell with her. Now, we're entering our retreat together, we're in company, but we can think of ourselves as entering this cell, this place of prayer, place of reflection, this place of stepping back from the world, allowing ourselves to be disconnected from the world in the sense of not being interrupted by it, not being bothered by it. So that's the invitation to join Julian in her cell. Because
an anchoress would be actually walled in.
Yes.
With windows and so on, but actually is shut away for the rest of
her life. That's right.
By choice. Well, then there were male anchorites as well.
There were.
Not just women.
That's right. And so what you would do is you would enter a cell attached to a church, so you're anchored to a church, hence the name. And you would follow a rule, you would make your vows to the bishop, and you would never leave that cell. But you would have windows onto the world and windows into the church. So there would be a squint into the church so you could participate in the Mass each day and receive communion. There would be a window for your servant. An anchoress or anchorite would always have to have a servant. They had to be
to bring food and
indeed
take away waste.
Indeed, exactly. And so they had to be self-sufficient in that way. And then a window onto the street where people could come and seek counsel. So actually your cell was very porous and you weren't really that cut off from the world because people could come to you. But what you could do, and what I feel Julian really, really wanted to be able to do, which is partly why she made the decision, is that you could pull the curtain across and the world would no longer be interrupting you. And you could have your solitude for prayer, and in her case, to reflect on these visions which she'd had, which were quite dangerous. They were quite radical. She needed to think about them at some depth in safety, because the church at the time was looking for heretics. It was getting quite anxious about heresy. And of course, this was a century of the pestilence. There was war. It was
the Black Death. They called it the pestilence.
They called it the pestilence. Yeah, it was an anxious century. It's another reason for writing the book. Actually, was to bring some of what she saw and understood into our century, because I think the wisdom speaks to us every bit as much as it would have done then. So this reading, the point in the story that it is just at the end of the funeral service that's held for the anchorite or anchoress as they enter the cell. So you are dying to the world, and it's a proper funeral service. And it finishes with the Dies Irae being chanted. And in my imagination of this ritual and this service, as the Dies Irae is being sounded, Julian is now in the cell on her own, and the portal, the doorway, is being bricked up. So we come to the end of the Dies Irae, the portal is bricked up, and here is Julian on her own in her cell. Stillness. There is a quiet rustling of clothes and patter of feet as the people leave the church. Then the thin cry of a baby rises, piercing the silence. Is it a cry of pain, or for new life, or both? The cry leaves the church with the people, and the silence returns. I rise and release the curtain over the squint, and I turn to face my cell, my coffin, my small home. I have never felt so fully alive. I am not expecting this. I was expecting to feel tortured by confinement at this moment, as the portal is bricked up, the impervious walls pressing upon me like the walls of my home in the city, my breath short and shallow, and panic only just kept under control. But the panic I felt when I first kneeled has gone. At last, I am alone. I am at home. My breath is deep and satisfying, like drinking delicious clean water and slaking a thirst I hardly knew I had. I stand in a vast space that feels like the cathedral, made bigger, not smaller by the walls, and it is all my own. Grateful relief floods through me like a balm. At last, I can ask the world to recede, and it will. All I have to do is to close the curtain, and I will be left in peace. So much space, just for me, and warm. A fire has been lit in the little fireplace. Life in new death. I reach with careful fingertips and touch the east wall where my altar stands beneath my crucifix, towards the dawn, towards new life, towards God. There is nothing now between me and God. No thing. I kneel and weep tears of joy and speak words of thanks for the time that is granted me here, now. Time and space and strength for the long, slow, interior journey deep into God, God deep into me. I have come home.
Thank you very much. And you're kindly going to let us record the input sessions going through these next 3 days together.
Yes, indeed. And thank you very much for asking me to lead the retreat. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here, this wonderful place.